Bram Stoker's Dracula, Part 3. Letter, Arthur Holmwood to Dr. Seward. Albemarle Hotel, 31st of August. My dear Jack, I want you to do me a favour. Lucy's ill. That is, she has no special disease, but she looks awful, and is getting worse every day. I have asked her if there's any cause. I do not dare to ask her mother, for to disturb the poor lady's mind about her daughter in her present state of health would be fatal. Mrs. Westenra has confided to me that her doom is spoken, disease of the heart, though poor Lucy does not know it yet. I am sure that there is something preying on my dear girl's mind. I am almost distracted when I think of her. To look at her gives me a pang. I told her I should ask you to see her, and though she demurred at first, I know why, old fellow. She finally consented. It will be a painful task for you, I know, old friend, but it is for her sake, and I must not hesitate to ask, or you to act. You are to come to lunch at Hillingham tomorrow, 2 o'clock, so as not to arouse any suspicion to Mrs. Westenra, and after lunch, Lucy will take an opportunity of being alone with you. I shall come in for tea. We can go away together. I am filled with anxiety, and I want to consult with you alone as soon as I can after you have seen her. Do not fail. Arthur. Telegram. Arthur Holmwood to Seward. 1st of September. I'm summoned to see my father, who is worse. I'm writing. Write me fully by 2 nights' post to ring. Wire me if necessary. Letter from Dr. Seward to Arthur Holmwood. 2nd of September. My dear old fellow, with regard to Miss Westenra's health, I hasten to let you know at once that in my opinion there is not any functional disturbance or any malady that I know of. At the same time, I am not by any means satisfied with her appearance. She is woefully different from what she was when I saw her last. Of course, you must bear in mind that I do not have full opportunity of examination, such as I should wish. Our very friendship makes a little difficulty, which not even medical science or custom can bridge over. I had better tell you exactly what happened, leaving you to draw, in a measure, your own conclusions. I shall then say what I have done and propose doing. I found Miss Westenra in seemingly gay spirits. Her mother was present, and in a few seconds I made up my mind that she was trying all she knew to mislead her mother and prevent her from being anxious. I have no doubt she guesses, though she does not know, what need of caution there is. We lunched alone, and as we all exerted ourselves to be cheerful, we got, as some kind of reward for our labours, some real cheerfulness amongst us. Then Miss Westenra went to lie down, and Lucy was left with me. We went into her boudoir, and till we got there her gaiety remained, for the servants were coming and going. As soon as the door was closed, however, the mask fell from her face, and she sank down into a chair with a great sigh, and hid her eyes with her hand. When I saw that her high spirits had failed, I at once took advantage of her reaction to make a diagnosis. She said to me very sweetly, "I cannot tell you how I loathe talking about myself." I reminded her that a doctor's confidence was sacred, but that you were grievously anxious about her. She got on to my meaning at once, and settled that matter in a word. "Tell Arthur everything you choose. I do not care for myself, but all for him, so I am quite free." I could easily see that she is somewhat bloodless, but I could not see the usual anemic signs, and by chance I was actually able to test the quality of her blood, for in opening a window which was stiff, a cord gave way, and she cut her hand slightly with broken glass. It was a slight matter in itself, but it gave me an evident chance, and I secured a few drops of the blood and have analyzed them. The qualitative analysis gives a quite normal condition, and shows, I should infer, in itself a vigorous state of health. In other physical matters, I was quite satisfied that there is no need for anxiety. But as there must be a cause somewhere, I have come to the conclusion that it must be something mental. She complains of difficulty in breathing satisfactorily at times, and of heavy, lethargic sleep, with dreams that frighten her, but regarding which she can remember nothing. She says that as a child she used to walk in her sleep, and that when in Whitby, the habit came back, and that once she walked out on the night and went to East Cliff, where Miss Murray found her, but she assures me that, of late, the habit has not returned. I am in doubt, and so have done the best thing I know of. I have written to my old friend and master, Professor Van Helsing, of Amsterdam, who knows as much about obscure diseases as anyone in the world. I have asked him to come over, and as you told me that all things were to be at your charge, I have mentioned to him that you are, and your relations to Miss Westenra. This, my dear fellow, is in obedience to your wishes, for I am only too proud and happy to do anything I can for her. Van Helsing would, I know, do anything for me for a personal reason, no matter on what ground he comes. We must accept his wishes. He is a seemingly arbitrary man, but this is because he knows what he is talking about better than anyone else. He's a philosopher, a metaphysician, and one of the most advanced scientists of his day. And he has, I believe, an absolutely open mind. This, with an iron nerve, a temper of the ice brook, an indomitable resolution, self-command, and toleration exalted from virtues to blessings, and the kindliest, truest heart that beats. These form his equipment for the noble work that he is doing for mankind, work both in theory and practice, for his views are as wide as his all-embracing sympathy. I tell you these facts that you may know why I have such confidence in him. I have asked him to come at once. I shall see Miss Westenra tomorrow again. She is to meet at the stores, so that I may not alarm her mother by too early a repetition of my call. Yours always, John Seward. Letter, Abraham Van Helsing, M.D., D.Ph.D., Lit, etc., etc., to Dr. Stewart. 2nd September. My good friend, when I have received your letter, I am already coming to you. By good fortune, I can leave just at once, without wrong to any of those who have trusted me. Were fortune other, then it were bad for those who have trusted, for I come to my friend when he call me to aid those he holds dear. Tell your friend that, when that time you suck from my wound so swiftly the poison of the gangrene, from that knife that our other friend, too nervous, let slip, you did more for him than when he wants my aids, and you call for them, than all his great fortune could do. But it is pleasure added to do for him, your friend. It is to you that I come. Have, then, rooms for me at the Great Eastern Hotel, so that I may be near to hand. And please it so arrange that we may see the young lady, not too late on the morrow, for it is likely that I may have to return here that night. But if need be, I shall come again in 3 days, and stay longer if it must. Till then, goodbye, my friend John. Van Helsing. Letter, Dr. Stewart to Honourable Arthur Holmwood, 3rd of September. My dear Art, Van Helsing has come and gone. He came on with me to Hillingham, and found that, by Lucy's discretion, her mother was lunching out, so that we were alone with her. Van Helsing has made a very careful examination of the patient. He is to report to me, and I shall advise you, for, of course, I was not present all the time. He is, I fear, much concerned, but says he must think. When I told him of our friendship, and how you trust to me in the matter, he said, "You must tell him all you think. Tell him what I think, for, if you can guess it, if you will." Nay, I am not jesting. This is no jest, but life and death. Perhaps more. I asked what he meant by that, for he was very serious. This was when we had come back to town, and he was having a cup of tea before starting on his return to Amsterdam. He would not give me any further clue. You must not be angry with me, Art, because his very reticence means that all his brains are working for her good. He will speak plainly enough when the time comes, be sure. So I told him I would simply write an account of our visit, just as if I were doing a descriptive special article for the Daily Telegraph. He seemed not to notice, but remarked that the smuts in London were not quite so bad as they used to be when he was a student here. I am to get his report tomorrow, if he can possibly make it. In any case, I am to have a letter. Well, as to the visit, Lucy was more cheerful than on the day when I first saw her, and certainly looked better. She had lost something of the ghastly look that so upset you, and her breathing was normal. She was very sweet to the Professor, as she always is, and tried to make him feel at ease, though I could see that the poor girl was making a hard struggle for it. I believe Van Helsing saw it too, for I saw the quick look under his bushy brows that I knew of old. Then he began to chat of all things except ourselves and diseases, and with such an infinite geniality that I could see poor Lucy's pretense of animation merge into reality. Then, without any seeming change, he brought the conversation gently round to his visit, and suavely said, "My dear young miss, I have the so great pleasure because you are so much beloved. That is much, my dear, ever were there, but which I do not see. They told me you were down in the spirit, and that you were of a ghastly pale. To them I say poof," and he snapped his fingers at me and went on. "But you and I shall show them how wrong they are. How can he?" And he pointed at me with the same look and gesture as that with which he pointed me out to his class, on, or rather after, particular occasion, which he never fails to remind me of. "Nor anything of a young lady's. He has his madams to play with and to bring them back to happiness. And to those that love them, it is much to do, and, but there are rewards, in that we can bestow such happiness. But the young ladies, he has no wife nor daughter, and the young do not tell themselves to be young. But to the old, like me, who have known so many sorrows and the causes of them. So, my dear, we will send him away to smoke the cigarette in the garden, whilst you and I have little talk all to ourselves." I took the hint and strolled out, and presently the professor came to the window and called me in. He looked grave, but said, "I have made careful examination, but there is no functional cause. With you I agree that there has been much blood lost. It has been, but is not. But the conditions of her are in no way anemic. I have asked her to send me her maid, that I may ask just one or two questions, that so I may not chance to miss nothing. I know well what she will say, and yet there is cause. There is always cause for everything. I must go back home and think. You must send to me the telegram every day, and if there be cause, I shall come again. The disease, or not to be all well, is a disease. Interest me, and this sweet young dear, she interests me too. She charm me, and for her, if not for you or disease, I come." As I tell you, he would not say a word more, even when we were alone. And so now, Art, you know all I know. I shall keep stern watch. I trust your poor father is rallying. It must be a terrible thing to you, my dear old fellow, to be placed in such a position between two people who are both so dear to you. I know your idea of duty to your father, and you are right to stick to it. But, if need be, I shall send you word to come at once to Lucy, so do not be over anxious unless you hear from me. Dr. Seward's Diary, 4th of September. Zoophagus patient still keeps up our interest in him. He had only one outburst, and that was yesterday at an unusual time. Just before the stroke of noon, he began to grow restless. The attendant knew the symptoms and at once summoned aid. Fortunately, the men came at a run, and were just in time, for at the stroke of noon, it became so violent that it took all their strength to hold him. In about 5 minutes, however, he began to get more and more quiet, and finally sank into a sort of melancholy, in which state he has remained up to now. The attendant tells me that his screams whilst in the paroxysm were really appalling. I found my hands full when I got in, attending to some sort of other patients who were frightened by him. Indeed, I can quite understand the effect. The sounds disturbed even me, though I was some distance away. It is now after the dinner hour of the asylum, and as yet my patient sits in a corner brooding, with a dull, sullen, woe-begone look on his face, which seems rather to indicate than to show something directly. I cannot quite understand it. Later. Another change in my patient. At 5 o'clock I looked in on him, and found him seemingly as happy and contented as he used to be. He was catching flies and eating them, and was keeping note of his capture by making nail marks on the edge of the door between the ridges of padding. When he saw me, he came over and apologized for his bad conduct, and asked me, in a very humble, cringing way, to be led back to his own room and to have his notebook again. I thought it well to humor him, so he is back in his room with the window open. He has the sugar of his tea spread out on the windowsill, and is reaping quite a harvest of flies. He is not now eating them, but putting them into a box as of old, and is already examining the corners of his room to find a spider. I tried to get him to talk about the past few days, for any clue to his thoughts would be of immense help to me. But he would not rise. For a moment or two he looked very sad, and said in sort of a faraway voice, as though saying it rather to himself than to me,
All over. All over. He's deserted me. No hope for me now unless I do it for myself.
Then suddenly, turning to me in a resolute way, he said,
Doctor, won't you be very good to me and let me have a little more sugar? I think it would be good for me.
And the flies? I said.
Yes, the flies like it too. And I like the flies, therefore I like it.
And there are people who know so little as to think that madmen do not argue. I procured him a double supply, and left him as happy a man as, I suppose, any in the world. I wish I could fathom his mind. Midnight. Another change in him. I had been to see Miss Westenra, whom I found much better, and had just returned, and was standing at our own gate looking at the sunset, when once more I heard him yelling. As his room is on the other side of the house, I could hear it better than in the morning. It was a shock to me to turn from the wonderful, smoky beauty of a sunset over London, with its lurid lights and inky shadows, and all the marvellous tints that come on foul clouds, even as on foul water, and to realize all the grim sternness of my own cold stone building, with its wealth of breathing misery, and my own desolate heart to endure it all. I reached him just as the sun was going down, and from his window saw the red disk sink. As it sank, he became less and less frenzied, and just as it dipped, he slid from the hands that held him, an inert mass on the floor. It is wonderful, however, what intellectual recuperative power lunatics have, for within a few minutes he stood up, quite calmly, and looked around him. I signalled to the attendants not to hold him, for I was anxious to see what he would do. He went straight over to the window and brushed out the crumbs of sugar. Then he took his fly box and emptied it outside and threw away the box. Then he shut the window and, crossing over, sat down on his bed. All of this surprised me, so I asked him, "Are you not going to keep flies any more?"
No,
said he.
I'm sick of all that rubbish.
He certainly is a wonderfully interesting study. I wish I could get some glimpse of his mind, or of the cause of his sudden passion. Stop. There may be a clue after all, if we can find why today his paroxysms came at high noon, and at sunset. Can it be that there is a malign influence of the sun at periods which affects certain natures, as at times the moon does others? We shall see. Telegram, Seward, London, to Van Helsing, Amsterdam. 4th of September. Patient still better today. Telegram, Seward, London, to Van Helsing, Amsterdam. 5th of September. Patient greatly improved. Good appetite, sleeps naturally, good spirits, colour coming back. Telegram, Seward, London, to Van Helsing, Amsterdam. 6th of September. Terrible change for the worse. Come at once. Do not lose an hour. I hold over telegram to Holmwood till I've seen you. Chapter 10. Letter. Dr. Seward to Arnold Arthur Holmwood. 6th of September. My dear Art, My news today is not so good. Lucy this morning had gone back a bit. There is, however, one good thing which has arisen from it. Mrs. Westenra was naturally anxious concerning Lucy, and has consulted me professionally about her. I took advantage of the opportunity, and told her that my old master, Van Helsing, a great specialist, was coming to stay with me, and that I would put her in his charge conjointly with myself. So now we can come and go without alarming her unduly. For a shock to her would mean sudden death, and this, in Lucy's weak condition, might be disastrous to her. We are hedged in with difficulties, all of us, my poor old fellow, but please, God, we shall come through them all right. If any need, I shall write, so that, if you do not hear from me, take it for granted that I am simply waiting for news. In haste. Yours ever, John Seward. Dr. Seward's Diary, 7th of September. The first thing Van Helsing said to me when we met at Liverpool Street was, "Have you said anything to our young friend, the lover of her?" "No," I said. I waited till I had seen you, as I said in my telegram. I wrote him a letter simply telling him that you were coming, as Miss Westenra was not so well, and that I should let him know if need be.
"Right, my friend," he said. "Quite right. Better he not know as yet. Perhaps he shall never know. I pray so. But if it be needed, then he shall know all. And, my good friend John, let me caution you. You deal with the madmen. All men are mad in some way or the other, and inasmuch as you deal discreetly with your madmen, so deal with God's madmen too, the rest of the world. You tell not your madmen what you do, nor why you do it. You tell them not what you think. So you shall keep knowledge in its place, where it may rest, where it may gather its kind around it and breed. You and I shall keep as yet what we know here and here." He touched me on the heart and on the forehead, and then touched himself the same way. "I have for myself thoughts at present. Later I shall unfold to you." "Why not now?" I asked. "It may do some good. We may arrive at some decision." He stopped and looked at me and said, "My friend John, when the corn is grown even before it has ripened, while the milk of its mother earth is in him, and the sunshine has not yet begun to paint him with its gold, the husbandman, he pull the ear and rub him between his rough hands, and blow away the green chaff, and say to you, 'Look, he's good corn. You will make good crop when the time comes.' I did not see the application and told him so. For reply, he reached over and took my ear in his hand and pulled it playfully, as he used long ago to do in lectures, and said, 'The good husbandman tell you so then because he knows, but not till then. But you do not find the good husbandman dig up his planted corn to see if he grow. That is for the children who play at husbandry, and not for those who take it as the work of their life. See you now, friend John? I have sown my corn, and nature has her work to do in making it sprout. If he sprout at all, there's some good promise, and I will wait till the ear begins to swell." He broke off, for evidently saw that I understood. Then he went on, and very gravely, "You were always a careful student, and your casebook was ever more full than the rest. You were only student then, now you are master, and I trust that good habit have not failed. Remember, my friend, that knowledge is stronger than memory. We should not trust the weaker. Even if you have not kept the good practice, let me tell you that this case of our dear miss is one that may be, mind I said may be, of such interest to us and others, and all the rest may not make him kick the beam, as your people say. Then take good note of it. Nothing is too small, I counsel you. Put down in record even your doubts and surmises. Hereafter, it may be of interest to you to see how true you guess. We learn from failure, not from success." When I described Lucy's symptoms, the same as before, but infinitely more marked,
He looked very grave, but said nothing. He took with him a bag in which were many instruments and drugs. The ghastly paraphernalia of a beneficial trade, as he once called, in one of his lectures, the equivalent of a professor of the healing craft. When we were shown in, Mrs. Westenra met us. She was alarmed, but not nearly so much as I expected from her. Nature, in one of her beneficent moods, has ordained that even death has some antidote to its own terrors. Here, in a case where any shock may prove fatal, matters are so ordered that, from some cause or another, the thing's not personal. Even the terrible change in her daughter, to whom she is so attached, do not seem to reach her. It is something like the way Dame Nature gathers round a foreign body in an envelope of some insensitive tissue which can protect from evil that which it would otherwise harm by contact. If this be an ordered selfishness, we should pause before we condemn any one of the vice of egoism, for there may be deeper root for its causes than we have knowledge of. I used my knowledge of this phase of spiritual pathology, and laid down a rule that she should not be present with Lucy, or think of her illness more than was absolutely required. She assented readily, so readily that I saw again the hand of nature fighting for life. Van Helsing and I were shown up to Lucy's room. If I was shocked when I saw her yesterday, I was horrified when I saw her today. She was ghastly, chalkily pale. The red seemed to have gone even from her lips and gums, and the bones of her face stood out prominently. Her breathing was painful to see or hear. Van Helsing's face grew set as marble, and his eyebrows converged till they almost touched over his nose. Lucy lay motionless, and did not seem to have strength to speak. So for a while, we were all silent. Then Van Helsing beckoned to me, and we went gently out of the room. The instant we had closed the door, he stepped quickly along the passage to the next door, which was open. Then he pulled me quickly in with him and closed the door. "My God," he said, "this is dreadful. There is no time to be lost. She will die for sheer want of blood to keep the heart's action as it should be. There must be transfusion of blood at once. Is it you or me?" "I am younger and stronger, Professor. It must be me." "Then get ready at once. I will bring up my bag. I am prepared." I went downstairs with him, and as we were going there was a knock at the hall door. When we reached the hall, the maid had just opened the door, and Arthur was stepping quickly in. He rushed up to me, saying in an eager whisper, "Jack, I was so anxious. I read between the lines of your letter, and must have been in agony. The dad was better, so I ran down here to see for myself. Is not that gentleman Dr. Van Helsing? I am so thankful to you, sir, for coming." When first the professor's eye had lit upon him, he had been angry at his interruption at such a time. But now, as he took in his stalwart proportions and recognized the strong young manhood which seemed to emanate from him, his eyes gleamed. Without a pause, he said to him gravely as he held out his hand, "Sir, you have come in time. You are the lover of our dear miss. She is bad. Very, very bad. Nay, my child, do not go like that." For he suddenly grew pale, and sat down in a chair, almost fainting. "You are to help her. You can do more than any that live, and your courage is your best help." "What can I do?" asked Arthur hoarsely. "Tell me, and I shall do it. My life is hers, and I will give the last drop of my blood in my body for her." The professor has a strongly humorous side, and I could from old knowledge detect a trace of its origin in his answer. "My young sir, I do not ask so much as that. Not the last." "What shall I do?" There was fire in his eyes, and his open nostril quivered with intent. Van Helsing slapped him on the shoulder. "Come," he said. "You are a young man. It is a man we want. You are better than me, better than my friend John." Arthur looked bewildered, and the professor went on by explaining in a kindly way. "Young miss is bad, very bad. She wants blood, and blood she must have or die. My friend John and I have consulted,
and we are about to perform what we call transfusion of blood, to transfer from full veins of one to empty veins which pine for him. John was to give his blood, as he is the more young and strong than me. Here Arthur took my hand and wrung it hard in silence. But now you are here, and you are more good than us, all the young who toil much in the world of thought. Our nerves are not so calm, and our blood not so bright than yours. Arthur turned to him and said, "If you only knew how gladly I would die for her, you would understand." He stopped, with a sort of choke in his voice. "Good boy," said Van Helsing. "In the not so far off you will be happy that you have done all for her you love. Come now, and be silent. You shall kiss her once before it is done, but then you must go, and you must leave at my sign. Say no word to Madame. You know how it is with her. There must be no shock. Any knowledge of this would be won. Come." We all went up to Lucy's room. Arthur, by direction, remained outside. Lucy turned her head and looked at us, but said nothing. She was not asleep, but she was simply too weak to make the effort. Her eyes spoke to us. That was all. Van Helsing took some things from his bag, and I laid them on a little table out of sight. Then he mixed a narcotic, coming over to the bed, said cheerily, "Now, little miss, here is your medication. Drink it off like a good child. See, I lift you so that to swallow is easy. Yes." She had made the effort with success. It astonished me how long the drug took to act. This, in fact, marked the extent of her weakness. The time seemed endless, until sleep began to flicker in her eyelids. At last, however, the narcotic began to manifest its potency. She fell into a deep sleep. When the professor was satisfied, he called Arthur into the room and bade him strip off his coat. Then he added, "You may take that one little kiss whiles I bring over the table. Friend John, help me." So, neither of us looked whilst he bent over her. Van Helsing, turning to me, said, "He is so young and strong, and the blood so pure, that we need not defibrillate it." Then, with swiftness, but with absolute method, Van Helsing performed the operation, and the transfusion went on. Something like life seemed to come back to poor Lucy's cheeks, and through Arthur's growing pallor, the joy of his face seemed absolutely to shine. After a bit, I began to grow anxious, for the loss of blood was telling on Arthur, strong man as he was. It gave me an idea of what a terrible strain Lucy's sister must have undergone, that what weakened Arthur only partially restored her. But the professor's face was set, and he stood watch in hand, with his eyes fixed now on the patient, and now on Arthur. I could hear my own heart beat. Presently he said in a soft voice, "Do not stir an instant. It is enough. You attend to him. I will look to her." When all was over, I could see how much Arthur was weakened. I dressed the wound and took his arm to bring him away. When Van Helsing spoke without turning round, "The man seems to have eyes in the back of his head. The brave lover, I think, deserve another kiss, which he shall have presently." And, as he had now finished his operation, he adjusted the pillow to the patient's head, and as he did so, the narrow black velvet band which she seems always to wear round her throat, buckled with an old diamond buckle which her lover had given her, was dragged a little up, and showed a red mark on her throat. Arthur did not notice it, but I could hear the deep hiss of indrawn breath, which is one of Van Helsing's ways of betraying emotion. He said nothing at the moment, but turned to me, saying, "Now, take down our brave young lover, give him the port wine, and let him lie down a while. He must then go home and rest, sleep much, and eat much, that he may be recruited of what he has been so given to his love. He must not stay here. Hold, a moment.
I may take it, sir, that you are anxious of a result. Then bring it with you, that in all the ways the operation is successful. You have saved her life this time, and you can go home, and the rest easy in mind that all that can be is. I shall tell her all when she is well. She shall love you none the less for what you have done. Goodbye. When Arthur and I had gone back to the room, Lucy was sleeping gently, but her breathing was stronger. I could see the counterpane move as her breast heaved. By the bedside sat Van Helsing, looking at her intently. The velvet band again covered the red mark. I asked the professor in a whisper, "What do you make of that mark on her throat?" "What do you make of it?" "I have not examined it yet," I answered, and then and there proceeded to loose the band. Just over the external jugular vein there were 2 punctures, not large, but not wholesome looking. There was no sign of disease, but the edges were white and worn-looking, as if by some trituration. It at once occurred to me that this wound, or whatever it was, might be the means of that manifest loss of blood. But I abandoned the idea as soon as formed, for such a thing could not be. The whole bed would have been drenched scarlet with the blood which the girl must have lost to leave such a pallor as she had before the transfusion. "Well?" said Van Helsing. "Well," said I can make nothing of it." The professor stood up. "I must go back to Amsterdam tonight," he said. "There are books and things there which I want. You must remain here all the night, and you must not let her sight pass from her." "Shall I have a nurse?" I asked. "We are the best nurses, you and I. You keep watch all night. See that she is well fed and that nothing disturbs her. You must not sleep all night. Later on we can sleep, you and I. I shall be back as soon as possible. And then you may begin." "May begin?" I said. "What on earth do you mean?" "We shall see," he answered, as he hurried out. He came back a moment later and put his head inside the door and said with the warning finger still held up, "Remember, she is your charge. If you leave her and harm befall, you shall not sleep easy hereafter." Dr. Seward's diary continued. 8th of September. I sat up all night with Lucy. The opiate worked itself off towards dusk, and she waked naturally. She looked a different being from what she had been before the operation. Her spirits even were good, and she was full of a happy vivacity. But I could see evidences of the absolute prostration which she had undergone. When I told Mrs. Westenra that Dr. Van Helsing had directed that I should sit up with her, she almost pooh-poohed the idea, pointing out her daughter's renewed strength and excellent spirits. I was firm, however, and made preparations for my long vigil. When her maid had prepared her for the night, I came in, having in the meantime had supper, and took a seat by the bedside. She did not in any way make objection, but looked at me gratefully whenever I caught her eye. After a long spell, she seemed sinking off to sleep, but with an effort seemed to pull herself together and shook it off. This was repeated several times, with greater effort and shorter pauses as the time moved on. It was apparent that she did not want to sleep, so I tackled the subject once. "You do not want to go to sleep?" "No, I am afraid." "Afraid to go to sleep? Why so? It is the boon we all crave for."
"Ah, not if you were like me. If sleep was to you a presage of horror."
presage of horror. What on earth do you mean?
I don't know. I don't know. That is what is so terrible. This weakness comes to me in sleep, until I dread the very thought.
But, my dear girl, you may sleep tonight. I am here watching you, and I can promise you that nothing will happen.
Ah, I can trust you.
I seized the opportunity and said, I promise you that if I see any evidence of bad dreams, I will wake you at once.
You will? Oh, will you really? How good you are to me. Then I will sleep.
And almost at the word, she gave a deep sigh of relief and sank back, asleep. All night long I watched by her. She never stirred, but slept on and on in a deep, tranquil, life-giving, health-giving sleep. Her lips were slightly parted, and her breast rose and fell with the regularity of a pendulum. There was a smile on her face, and it was evident that no bad dreams had come to disturb her peace of mind. In the early morning her maid came, and I left her in her care and took myself back home, for I was anxious about many things. I sent a short wire to Van Helsing and to Arthur, telling them the excellent result of the operation. My own work, with its manifold arrears, took me all day to clear off. It was dark when I was able to inquire about my zoophagous patient. The report was good. He had been quiet for the past day and night. A telegram came from Van Helsing at Amsterdam whilst I was at dinner, suggesting that I should be at Hillingham tonight, as it might well be at hand, and stating that he was leaving by the night mail, and would join me in the early morning. 9th of September. I was pretty tired and worn out when I got to Hillingham. For 2 nights I had hardly had a wink of sleep, and my brain was beginning to feel that numbness which marks cerebral exhaustion. Lucy was up and in cheerful spirits. When she shook hands with me, she looked sharply in my face and said,
"No sitting up for you tonight for you. You're worn out. I am quite well again. Indeed, I am. And if there is to be any sitting up, it is I who sit up with you."
I would not argue the point, but went and had my supper. Lucy came with me, and, enlivened by her charming presence, I made an excellent meal, and had a couple of glasses of the more than excellent port. Then Lucy took me upstairs, and showed me a room next to her own, where a cosy fire was burning.
"Now," she said, "you must stay here. I shall leave this door open, and my door too. You can lie on the sofa, for I know that nothing would induce any of you doctors to go to bed whilst there is a patient above the horizon. If I want anything, I shall call out, and you can come to me at once."
I could not but acquiesce, for I was dog-tired, and could not have sat up had I tried. So, on her renewing a promise to call me if she would want anything, I lay on the sofa, and forgot all about everything.
Lucy Westenra's diary, 9th of September. I feel so happy tonight. I've been so miserably weak that to be able to think and move about is like feeling sunshine after a long spell of east wind out of a steel sky. Somehow Arthur feels very, very close to me. I seem to feel his presence warm about me. I suppose it is that sickness and weakness are selfish things, and turn our inner eyes and sympathy on ourselves, whilst health and strength give love rein, and in thought and feeling he can wander where he wills. I know where my thoughts are. If only Arthur knew. My dear, your ears must tingle as you sleep as mine do waking. Oh, the blissful rest of last night! How I slept with that dear, good Dr. Seward watching me, and tonight I shall not fear to sleep, since he is close at hand and within call. Thank everybody for being so good to me. Thank God. Good night, Arthur.
Dr. Seward's Diary, 10th of September. I was conscious of the professor's hand on my head and started awake all in a second. It is one of the things we learn in an asylum, at any rate. And how was our patient? Well, when I left her, or rather when she left me, I answered. Come, let us see, he said. And together we went into the room. The blind was down, and I went over to raise it gently, whilst Van Helsing stopped, with his soft, cat-like tread, over to the bed. As I raised the blind and the morning sunlight flooded the room, I heard the professor's low hiss of inspiration, and, knowing its rarity, a deadly fear shot through my heart. As I passed over, he moved back, and his exclamation of horror, Gott in Himmel, needed no enforcement for his agonized face. He raised his hand and pointed to the bed, and his iron face was drawn and ashen white. I felt my knees begin to tremble. There, on the bed, seemingly in a swoon, lay poor Lucy, more horribly white and wan-looking than ever. Even the lips were white, and the gums seemed to have shrunken back from the teeth, as we sometimes see in a corpse after a prolonged illness. Van Helsing raised his foot to stamp in anger, but the instinct of his life and all the long years of habit stood to him, and he put it down again softly. Quick, he said, bring the brandy. I flew to the dining room and returned with the decanter. He wetted the poor white lips with it, and together we rubbed palm and wrist and heart. He felt her heart, and after a few moments of agonizing suspense, said, It is not too late. It beats, though feebly. All our work is undone, but we must begin again. There is no young Arthur here now. I have to call on you yourself this time, friend John. As he spoke, he was dipping into his bag and producing the instruments for transfusion. I had taken off my coat and rolled up my shirt sleeve. There was no possibility of an opiate just at present, and no need of one. And so, without a moment's delay, we began the operation. After a time, it did not seem a short time either, for the draining away of one's blood, no matter how willingly it be given, is a terrible feeling. Van Helsing held up a warning finger. Do not stir, he said. But I fear that with growing strength, she may wake. That would make danger. Oh, so much danger. But I shall precaution take. I shall give hypodermic injection of morphia. He proceeded then, swiftly and deftly, to carry out his intent. The effect on Lucy was not bad, for the faint seemed to merge subtly into the narcotic sleep. It was with a feeling of personal pride that I could see a faint tinge of color steal back into the pallid cheeks and lips. No man knows, till he experiences it, what it is to feel his own lifeblood drain away into the veins of the woman he loves. The professor watched me critically. That will do, he said. Already, I remonstrated. You took a great deal more from art. To which he smiled, and a sort of smile as he replied, He is her lover, her fiancé. You have work, much work, to do for her and for others, and the present will suffice. When we stopped the operation, he attended to Lucy, whilst I applied digital pressure to my own incision. I laid down, whilst I waited his leisure to attend to me, for I felt faint and a little sick. By and by he bound up my wound and sent me downstairs to get a glass of wine for myself. As I was leaving the room, he came after me and half whispered, Mind, nothing must be said of this. If our young lover should turn up unexpected, as before, no word to him. It would at once frighten him and then jealous him too. There must be none. So, When I came back, he looked at me carefully and then said, "You're not much the worse. Go into the room and lie on your sofa. Rest a while. Then have much breakfast and come here to me." I followed out his orders, for I knew how right and wise they were. I had done my part, and now my next duty was to keep up my strength. I felt very weak, and in the weakness lost something of the amazement at what had occurred. I fell asleep on the sofa, however, wondering over and over again how Lucy had made such a retrograde movement, and how she could have been drained of so much blood with no sign anywhere to show for it. I think I must have continued my wonder in my dreams, for, sleeping and waking, my thoughts always came back, with the little punctures in her throat, and the ragged, exhausted appearance of their edges, tiny though they were. Lucy slept well into the day, and when she woke, she was fairly well and strong, though not nearly so much as the day before. When Van Helsing had seen her, he went out for a walk, leaving me in charge, with strict injunctions that I was not to leave her for a moment. I could hear his voice in the hall, asking the way to the nearest telegraph office. Lucy chatted with me freely, and seemed quite unconscious that anything had happened. I tried to keep her amused and interested. When her mother came up to see her, she did not seem to notice any change whatever, but said to me gratefully, "We owe you so much, Dr. Stewart, for all you have done. But you really must know that take care not to overwork yourself. You are looking pale yourself. You want a wife to nurse and look after you a bit. That you do." As she spoke, Lucy turned crimson, though it was only momentarily, for her poor, wasted veins could not stand for long such an unwanted drain to the head. The reaction came in excessive pallor as she turned imploring eyes on me. I smiled and nodded, and laid my finger on my lips. With a sigh, she sank back amid her pillows. Van Helsing returned in a couple of hours, and presently said to me, "Now, you go home, and eat much and drink enough. Make yourself strong. I stay here tonight, and I shall sit up with little miss myself. You and I must watch the case, and we must have none other to know. I have grave reasons. No, do not ask them. Think what you will. Do not fear to even think. The most not probable. Good night." In the hall, two of the maids came to me, and asked if they, or either of them, might not sit up with Miss Lucy. They implored me to let them, and when I said it was Dr. Van Helsing's wish that either he or I should sit up, they asked me quite piteously to intercede with the foreign gentleman. I was much touched by their kindness. Perhaps it is because I am weak at present, and perhaps it is because it was on Lucy's account that their devotion was manifested, for over and over again have I seen similar instances of women's kindness. I got back here in time for late dinner, went my rounds, all well, and set this down whilst waiting for sleep. It is coming. 11th of September. This afternoon I went over to Hillingham. I found Dr. Van Helsing in excellent spirits, and Lucy much better. Shortly after I had arrived, a big parcel came abroad for the professor. He opened it with much impressment. Assumed, of course, and showed a great bundle of white flowers. "These are for you, Miss Lucy," he said. "For me? Dr. Van Helsing?" "Yes, my dear, but not for you to play with. These are medicines." Here Lucy made a wry face. "Nay, but they are not to take in a decoction or a nauseous form. So you need not snub that so charming a nose. Or I shall point out to my friend Arthur what woes he may have had to endure in seeing so much beauty that he loves so much distort. Ah, my pretty miss, that bring these so nice nose all straight again. This is medicinal, but you do not know how.
I put him in your window. I make pretty wreath and hang him around your neck, so that you sleep well. Oh yes, they, like the lotus flower, make your trouble forgotten. It smells so like the waters of Lethe, and of that fountain of youth that the conquistadors sought for in the Floridas, and find him all too late. Whilst he was speaking, Lucy had been examining the flowers and smelling them. Now she threw them down, saying with half laughter and half disgust, "Oh, Professor, I believe you are only putting up a joke on me. Why, these flowers are only common garlic." To my surprise, Van Helsing rose up and said with all the sternness, his iron jaw set and his bushy eyebrows meeting, "No trifling with me. I never jest. There is grim purpose in all I do, and I warn you that you do not thwart me. Take care, for the sake of others, if not for your own." Then, seeing poor Lucy scared, as she might well be, he went on more gently. "Oh, little miss, my dear, do not fear me. I only do for your own good, but there is much virtue to you in those so common flowers. See, I place them myself in your room. I make myself the wreath that you are to wear. But hush, no telling to others that make so inquisitive questions. We must obey, and silence is a part of obedience. And obedience is to bring you strong and well into loving arms that wait for you. Now, sit still a while. Come with me, friend John. You shall help me deck the room with my garlic, which is all the way from Haarlem, where my friend Vanderpoel raised herb in his glass houses all the year. I had to telegraph yesterday, but they would not have been here." We went into the room, taking the flowers with us. The professor's actions were certainly odd, and not to be found in any pharmacopoeia that I ever heard of. First, he fastened up the windows and latched them securely. Next, taking a handful of the flowers, he rubbed them all over the sashes, as though to ensure that every whiff of air might get in would be laden with the garlic smell. Then, with the wisp, he rubbed all over the jamb of the door, above, below, and at each side, and round the fireplace in the same way. It all seemed grotesque to me, and presently I said, "Well, Professor, I know you always have a reason for what you do, but this certainly puzzles me. It is well we have no skeptic here, or he would say that you were working some spell to keep out an evil spirit." "Perhaps I am," he answered quietly, as he began to make the wreath which Lucy was to wear round her neck. We then waited whilst Lucy made her toilet for the night, and when she was in bed he came and himself fixed the wreath of garlic around her neck. The last words he said to her were, "Take care you do not disturb it, and even if the room feel close, do not tonight open the window or the door." "I promise," said Lucy. "And thank you both 1,000 times for all your kindness to me. Oh, what have I done to be blessed with such friends?" As we left the house in my fly, which was waiting, Van Helsing said, "Tonight I can sleep in peace, and sleep I want. 2 nights of travel, much reading in the day between, and much anxiety on the day to follow, and a night to sit up without to wink. Tomorrow, in the morning, early you call for me, and we'll come together to see our pretty miss, so much more strong for my spell, which I've worked." He seemed so confident that I, remembering my own confidence 2 nights before, and with the baneful result, felt awe and vague terror. It must have been my weakness that made me hesitate to tell it to my friend, but I felt it all the more, like unshed tears.
Chapter 11.
Lucy Westenra's diary. 12th of September. How good they are all to me. I quite love that dear Dr. Van Helsing. I wonder why he was so anxious about these flowers. He positively frightened me. He was so fierce. And yet, he must have been right, for I feel comfort from them already. Somehow, I do not dread being alone tonight, and I can go to sleep without fear. I shall not mind any flapping outside the window. Oh, the terrible struggle that I have had against sleep so often of late. The pain of the sleeplessness, or the pain of the fear of sleep. With such unknown horrors as it has for me. How blessed are some people whose lives have no fears, no dreads, to whom sleep is a blessing that comes nightly, and brings nothing but sweet dreams. Well, here I am tonight, hoping for sleep, and lying like Ophelia in the play, with virgin krantz and mate instruments. I never liked garlic before, but tonight it is delightful. There is peace in its smell. I feel sleep coming already. Good night, everybody.
Dr. Seward's diary. 13th of September. Called at the Berkeley and found Van Helsing, as usual, up to time. The carriage ordered from the hotel was waiting. The professor took his bag, which he always brings with him now. Let all be put down exactly. Van Helsing and I arrived at Hillingham at 8 o'clock. It was a lovely morning. The bright sunshine and all the fresh feeling of early autumn seemed like the completion of nature's annual work. The leaves were turning to all kinds of beautiful colors, but had not yet begun to drop from the trees. When we entered, we met Mrs. Westenra coming out of the morning room. She's always an early riser. She greeted us warmly and said,
"You'll be glad to know that Lucy is better. The dear child is still asleep. I looked into her room and saw her, but did not go in, lest I should disturb her."
The professor smiled and looked quite jubilant. He rubbed his hands together and said,
"Aha! I thought I had diagnosed the case. My treatment is working."
To which she answered,
"You must not take all the credit yourself, Doctor. Lucy's state this morning is due in part to me."
"How do you mean, ma'am?" asked the professor.
"Well, I was anxious about the dear child in the night and went into her room. She was sleeping soundly, so soundly that even my coming did not wake her. But the room was awfully stuffy. There were a lot of those horrible strong-smelling flowers about everywhere, and she had actually a bunch of them round her neck. I feared that the heavy odor would be too much for the dear child in her weak state, so I took them all away, and opened a bit of the window to let in a little fresh air. You will be pleased with her, I am sure."
She moved off into her own boudoir, where she usually breakfasted early. As she had spoken, I watched the professor's face, and saw it turn ashen grey. He had been able to attain his self-command whilst the poor lady was present, for he knew her state and how mischievous a shock would be. He actually smiled on her as he held open the door for her to pass into her room. But the instant she had disappeared, he pulled me suddenly and forcibly into the dining room and closed the door. Then, for the first time in my life, I saw Van Helsing break down. He raised his hands over his head in a sort of mute despair, and then beat his palms together in a helpless way. Finally, he sat down in a chair, and, putting his hands before his face, began to sob, with loud, dry sobs that seemed to come from the very racking of his heart. Then he raised his arms again, as though appealing to the whole universe. "God, God, God," he said, "what have we done? What has this poor thing done, that we are to be so sore beset? Is there fate amongst us still, sent down from the pagan world of old, that such things must be in such way? This poor mother,
all unknowing and all for the best, as she think, does such thing as lose her daughter body and soul. And we must not tell her. We must not even warn her, or she die, and then both die. Oh, how we are beset. Oh, all the powers of the devils against us.
Suddenly, he jumped to his feet.
Come,
He said,
come, we must see and act. Devils, or no devils, or all the devils at once. It matters not, we fight them all the same.
He went to the hall door for his bag, and together we went up to Lucy's room. Once again I drew up the blind whilst Van Helsing went towards the bed. This time he did not start as he looked on the poor face with the same awful waxen pallor as before. He wore a look of stern sadness and infinite pity.
As I expected,
he murmured, with that hissing inspiration of his which meant so much. Without a word he went and locked the door, and then began to set out on the little table the instruments for yet another operation of transfusion of blood. I had long ago recognized the necessity, and begun to take off my coat. But he stopped me with a warning hand.
"No,"
he said.
"Today you must operate. I shall provide. You're weakened already."
As he spoke, he took off his coat and rolled up his shirt sleeve. Again the operation, again the narcotic. Again some sort of color to the ashy cheeks, and the regular breathing of healthy sleep. This time I watched whilst Van Helsing recruited himself and rested. Presently he took an opportunity of telling Miss Westenra that she must not remove anything from Lucy's room without consulting him, that the flowers were of medicinal value, and that the breathing of their odor was a part of the system of cure. Then he took over the care of the case himself, saying that he would watch this night and the next, and would send me word when to come. After another hour, Lucy waked from her sleep, fresh and bright, and seemingly not much the worse for her terrible ordeal. What does it all mean? I am beginning to wonder if my long habit of life amongst the insane is beginning to tell upon my own brain.
Lucy Westenra's diary, 17th September. 4 days and nights of peace. I am getting so strong that I hardly know myself. It is as if I had passed through some long nightmare, and had just awakened to see the beautiful sunshine and feel the fresh air of the morning around me. I have a dim half-remembrance of long, anxious times of waiting and fearing, darkness in which there was not even the pain of hope to make present distress more poignant. And then, long spells of oblivion, and the rising back to life as a diver coming up through a great press of water. Since, however, Dr. Van Helsing has been with me, all this bad dreaming seems to have passed away. The noises that used to frighten me out of my wits, the flapping against the windows, the distant voices which seemed so close to me, the harsh sounds that came from I know not where, and commanded me to do I know not what, have all ceased. I go to bed now without any fear of sleep. Do not even try to keep awake. I have grown quite fond of the garlic, and a boxful arrives for me every day from Haarlem. Tonight, Dr. Van Helsing is going away, as he has to be for a day in Amsterdam. But I need not be watched. I am well enough to be left alone. Thank God for Mother's sake, and dear Arthur's, and for all our friends who have been so kind. I shall not even feel the change, for last night Dr. Van Helsing slept in his chair a lot of the time. I found him asleep twice when I woke, but I did not fear to go to sleep again, although the boughs or bats or something napped almost angrily against the window panes.
The Pall Mall Gazette, 18th of September. The Escaped Wolf. Perilous adventure of our interviewer. Interview with the keeper in the Zoological Gardens. After many inquiries and almost as many refusals, and perpetually using the words Pall Mall Gazette as a sort of talisman, I managed to find the keeper of the section of the Zoological Gardens in which the wolf department is included. Thomas Builder lives in one of the cottages in the enclosure behind the elephant house, and was just sitting down to his tea when I found him. Thomas and his wife are hospitable folk, elderly, and without children, and if the specimen I enjoyed of their hospitality be of the average kind, their lives must be pretty comfortable. The keeper would not enter on what he called business until the supper was over, and all was satisfied. Then, when the table was cleared, and he had lit his pipe, he said, "Now, sir, you can go on and ask me what you want. You'll excuse me refusing to talk about professional subjects afore meals. I gives the wolves and the jackals and the hyenas and all our section their tea before I begins to ask them questions." "How do you mean, ask them questions?" I queried, wishful to get him into a talkative humour. "Into them over the ear with the pole is one way. Scratching of their hearts, here's another. When gents is flush, wants a bit to show off the gals, I don't so much mind the first. Be in with the pole afore I chucks them their dinner. But I waits till they've had the sherry and coffee, so to speak. I tries on with the ear scratching, mind you," he added philosophically. "There's a deal of the same nature in us as in them the Nummulies. Here's you a-coming and asking me questions about my business, and I the grumpy that like the only for your bloomin' earth quid. You'd I seen you blue first before I answered. Not even when you asked me sarcastic like, if I'd like to ask you the superintendent if you might ask me questions. Without offence did I tell you to go to hell? You did. And when you said to report me for using of obscene language, it was eating me over the head. But the arf quid made it all right. I weren't going to fight, so I waited for the food, and did with my owl as the wolves and lions and tigers does, but Lord left the earth. Now that the old human has struck a chunk of her tea cake in me, and rinsed me out with her bloomin' old teapot, and I've lit up, you must scratch my ears for all you're worth, and won't get even the growl out of me. Drive along with your questions. I know what you're a-coming, that there escaped wolf." "Exactly. I want you to give me your view of it. Just tell me how it happened. And when I know the facts, I'll get you to say what you consider was the cause of it, and how you think the whole affair will end." "All right, governor. Here's about the whole story. That 'ere wolf, what we call the bearsticker, was one of these grey ones that came from Norway to Jarmrux, which we bought him off of 4 years ago. He was a nice, well-behaved wolf that never gave no trouble to talk of. I'm more surprised at him for wanting to get out nor any other animal in this place. But there, you can't trust wolves no more than women." "Don't you mind him, sir," broke in Mrs. Tom with a cheery laugh. "He's got the mind in all the animals, so long that blessed if he ain't like an old wolf himself. But there ain't no harm in him." "Well, sir, it was about 2 hours after fading yesterday when I first heard of my disturbance. I was making up a litter in the monkey house for a young puma which was ill. But when I heard the yelping and howling, I came away straight. There was a bear sicking, a tearing like a mad thing at the bars as if he wanted to get out. There wasn't much people about that day, and close at hand was only one man, a tall, thin chap with a hooked nose and a pointed beard, with a few white hairs running through it. He had a hard, cold look in his red eyes, and I took a sort of mislike to him, for it seemed as if it was him, as he was irritated at. He had white kid gloves on his hands, and as he pointed out the animals to me, he says, "Caper, these wolves seem upset at something." "Maybe it's you," says I, for I did not like the airs he gave himself. He didn't get angry, as I hoped he would, but he smiled a kind of insolent smile, with a mouthful of wide, sharp teeth. "Oh no, they wouldn't like me," he says. "Oh yes, they would," says I, imitating of him. "They likes a bone or two to clean their teeth on about tea time, which you is a bagful." But it was one thing. When the animals ceased to talk and they lay down, and when I went over to Berserker, he let me stroke his ear same as ever. That there man came over and blessed, but if he didn't put in his hand and stroke the old wolf's ears too. "Take care," says I, "Berserker is quick." "Never mind," he says. "I'm used to him." "Are you in the business yourself?" says I, taking off my hat, for a man what trades in wolves, and etc., is a good friend to capers. "No," says he, "not exactly in this business, but I've made pets of several." And with that, he lives as polite as a lord, and walks away. Old Berserker kept a looking after him, till he was out of sight, and then went and laid down in the corner, and wouldn't come out whole evening. Well, last night, so soon as the moon was up, the wolves all began a howling. There weren't nothing for them to howl at. There weren't none there, except someone that was evidently calling a dog somewheres out back of the gardens in the park road. Once or twice I went out to see that all was right, and it was. Then the howling stopped. Just before 12 o'clock, I took a look around, afore turning in and busting me. But when I came opposite old Berserker's cage, I see the rails broken and twisted about, and the cage empty. And that's all I know for certain. Did anyone else see anything? Oh, one of our gardeners was a coming home about the time from our harmony, when he sees a big grey dog coming out of the garden cages. At least so he says, but I don't give much of it for myself. For if he did, he never said a word about it to his missus when he got home. And it was only after the escape from the wolf has made known, and he'd been up all night hunting for the pack of Berserker, that he remembered seeing anything. My own belief was that the harmony and got his head. "Now, Mr. Builder, can you count in any way for the escape of the wolf?" "Well, sir," he said with a suspicious sort of modesty, "I think I can. But I don't know as how you'd be satisfied with the theory." "Certainly I shall. If a man like you, who knows the animals from experience, can't hazard a good guess at any rate, who's even to try?" "Well then, sir, I accounts for it this way. It seems to me that our wolf escaped, simply because he wanted to get out." From the hearty way that both Thomas and his wife laughed at the joke, I could see that it had done service before, and that the whole explanation was simply an elaborate sell. I couldn't cope in badinage with the worthy Thomas, but I thought I knew a surer way to his heart. So I said, "Now, Mr. Builder, we'll consider that first half-sovereign worked off, and this brother of his is waiting to be claimed when you've told me what you think will happen." "Right you are, sir," he said briskly. "You'll excuse me now, for it's chaffing of ye, but the old woman here winked at me, which isn't much as telling me to go on." "Well, I never," said the old lady. "My opinion is this. That ere wolf is idling off somewheres. The gardener, what remembered said he was a galloping northward, faster than a horse could go. But I don't believe him, for, you see, sir, wolves don't gallop no more than dogs nor does. They ain't not being built that way. Wolves is fine things in a storybook, and they say, when they gets in packs and mischieving something that's more afeard than they can make a devil of a noise and chop it up, whatever it is. But Lord bless you, in real life, a wolf is only a low creature, not half so clever or bold as a good dog, not half a quarter so much fighting him. He's one ain't been used to fighting, or even to providing for himself, and more like he's got somewhere round the park idling and shivering off, and if he thinks it at all, Wondering where he used to get his naked breakfast from. Maybe he's got down some area and is in a course. My eye wants some good cook get a rum start when he sees his green eyes a shining at her out of the dark. If he can't get food, he's bound to go look for it. Mayhap he may chance to light on a butcher shop in time. If he doesn't, then some nursemaid goes a walking off with the soldier, leaving on the hyphen for the perambulator. Well, and I shouldn't be surprised if the census is one babby less, that's all. I was handing him the half-sovereign when something came bobbing up against the window, and Mr. Builder's face doubled its natural length with surprise. God bless me, he said. If I told Bersker come back by himself. He went to the door and opened it. A most unnecessary proceeding, it seemed to me. I have always thought that a wild animal never looks so well as when some obstacle or pronounced durability is between us. A personal experience has intensified rather than diminished that idea. After all, however, there is nothing like custom, for neither Builder nor his wife thought any more of the wolf than I should of a dog. The animal itself was a peaceful and well-behaved as the father of all picture wolves, Red Riding Hood's quondam friend, whilst moving her confidence and masquerade. The whole scene was an utterable mixture of comedy and pathos. The wicked wolf for that half a day had paralyzed London and set all the children in town shivering in their shoes. Was there in a sort of pertinent mood, and was received and petted like a sort of vulpine prodigal son. Old Builder examined him all over with most tender solicitude, and when he had finished with his pertinent, said, "There, I knew the poor old chap would get into some sort of trouble. I say it all along. Here's his head all cotton full of broken glass. He's been a-getting all of some bloomin' wall or another. It's a shame that old people are allowed to top their walls of broken bottles. This here's what comes of it. Come along, Bersker." He took the wolf and locked him up in a cage, with a piece of meat that satisfied, in quantity at any rate, the elementary conditions of the fatted calf, and went off to report. I came off too, to report the only exclusive information that is given today regarding the strange escapade at the zoo. Dr. Seward's Diary, 17th of September. I was engaged after dinner in my study, posting up my books, which, through press of other work and the many visits to Lucy, had fallen sadly into arrear. Suddenly, the door was burst open, and in rushed my patient with his face distorted with passion. I was thunderstruck. For such a thing as a patient getting of his own accord into the superintendent's study is almost unknown. Without an instant's pause, he made straight at me. He had a dinner knife in his hand, and as I saw he was dangerous, I tried to keep the table between us. He was too quick and too strong for me, however, for before I could get my balance, he had struck at me and cut my left wrist rather severely. Before he could strike again, however, I got in my right, and he was sprawling on his back on the floor. My wrist bled feebly, and quite a little pool trickled onto the carpet. I saw that my friend was not intent on further effort, and occupied myself binding up my wrist, keeping a wary eye on the prostrate figure all the time. When the attendants rushed in, and we turned our attention to him, his employment positively sickened me. He was lying on his belly on the floor, licking up, like a dog, the blood which had fallen from my wounded wrist. He was easily secured, and, to my surprise, went with the attendants quite placidly, simply repeating over and over again, "The blood is life! The blood is life!" I cannot afford to lose blood just at present. I have lost too much of late for my physical good, and then the prolonged strain of Lucy's illness and its horrible phases is telling on me. I am overexcited and weary, and I need rest, rest, rest. Happily, Van Helsing has not summoned me, so I need not forego my sleep. Tonight, I could not do well without it. Telegram, Van Helsing, Antwerp, pursued, Carfax. Sent to Carfax, Sussex, as no county given, delivered late by 22 hours. 17th September. Do not fail to be at Hillingham tonight. If not watching all the time, frequently, visit and see that flowers are placed. Very important, do not fail. Shall be with you as soon as possible after arrival. Dr. Seward's Diary. 18th September. Just off for train to London. The arrival of Van Helsing's telegram filled me with dismay. A whole night lost, and I know by bitter experience what may happen in a night. Of course, it is possible that all may be well, but what may have happened? Surely there is some horrible doom hanging over us, that every possible accident should thwart us in all we try to do. I shall take this cylinder with me, and then I can complete my entry on Lucy's phonograph.
Memorandum left by Lucy Westenra, 17th September, night. I write this and leave it to be seen, so that no one may by chance get into trouble through me. This is an exact record of what took place tonight. I feel I am dying of weakness, and have barely strength to write, but it must be done if I die in the doing. I went to bed as usual, taking care of the flowers were placed as Dr. Van Helsing directed, and soon fell asleep. I was waked by the flapping at the window, which had begun after that sleepwalking on the cliff at Whitby when Mina saved me, and which now I know so well. I was not afraid, but I did wish that Dr. Seward was in the next room, as Dr. Van Helsing said he would be, so that I might have called him. I tried to go to sleep, but I could not. Then there came to me the old fear of sleep, and I determined to keep awake. Perversely, sleep would try to come when I did not want it to, so, as I feared to be alone, I opened my door and called out, "Is anybody there?" There was no answer. I was afraid to wake Mother, and so closed my door again. Then, outside in the shrubbery, I heard a sort of howl like a dog's, but more fierce and deeper. I went to the window and looked out, but could see nothing except a big bat, which had evidently been buffeting its wings against the window. So, I went back to bed again, but determined not to go to sleep. Presently, the door opened, and Mother looked in. Seeing by my moving I was not asleep, came in, and sat by me. She said to me even more sweetly and softly than her wont, "I was uneasy about your darling, and came in to see that you were all right." I feared she might catch cold sitting there, and asked her to come in and sleep with me. So she came into bed and lay down beside me. She did not take off her dressing gown, for she said she would only stay a while, and then go back to her own bed. As she lay there in my arms, and I in hers, the flapping and buffeting came to the window again. She was startled and a little frightened, and cried out, "What is that?" I tried to pacify her, and at last succeeded, and then she lay quiet, and I could hear her poor, dear heart still beating terribly. After a while, there was a low howl again in the shrubbery, and shortly thereafter there was a crash at the window, and a lot of broken glass was hurled on the floor. The window blind blew back with the wind that rushed in, and in the aperture of the broken panes there was the head of a great, gaunt, grey wolf. Mother cried out in a fright, and struggled up with a sitting posture, and clutching wildly at anything that would help her. Amongst other things, she clutched the wreath of flowers that Dr. Van Helsing insisted on wearing around my neck, and tore it away from me. For a second or two she sat up, pointing at the wolf, and there was a strange and horrible gurgling in her throat. Then she fell over, as if struck with lightning, and her head hit my forehead and made me dizzy for a moment or two. The room and all round seemed to spin round. I kept my eyes fixed on the window, but the wolf drew his head back, and a whole myriad of little specks seemed to come blowing in through the broken window, and wheeling and circling round like the pillar of dust that travellers describe when there's a simoon in the desert. I tried to stir, but there was some spell upon me, and my dear mother's poor body, which seemed to grow cold already, for her dear heart had ceased to beat, weighed me down, and I remembered no more for a long while. The time did not seem long, but very, very awful, till I recovered consciousness again. Somewhere near a passing bell was tolling. The dogs all round the neighbourhood were howling, and in our shrubbery, seemingly just outside, a nightingale was singing. I was dazed and stupid with pain and terror and weakness, but the sound of the nightingale seemed like the voice of my dead mother come back to comfort me. The sound seemed to have awakened the maids, too, for I could hear their bare feet pattering outside my door. I called to them, and they came in, and when they saw what had happened, and what it was that lay over me on the bed, they screamed out. The wind rushed in through the broken window, and the door slammed to. They lifted off the body of my dear mother, and laid her, covered up with a sheet, on the bed after I had got up. They were all so frightened and nervous that I directed them to go to the dining room, and each have a glass of wine. The door flew open for an instant and closed again. The maids shrieked, and then went in a body to the dining room. I laid what flowers I had on my dear mother's breast. When they were there, I remembered that Dr. Van Helsing had told me, but I did like to remove them. And besides, I would have some of the servants to sit up with me now. I was surprised that the maids did not come back. I called to them, but got no answer. So I went to the dining room to look for them. My heart sank when I saw what had happened. They, all four, lay helpless on the floor, breathing heavily. The decanter of sherry was on the table half full, but there was a queer, acrid smell about. I was suspicious and examined the decanter. It smelt of laudanum, and looking on the sideboard, I found that the bottle which Mother uses for her... did use, was empty. What am I to do? What am I to do? I am back in the room with Mother. I cannot leave her. And I am alone, save for the sleeping servants, whom someone has drugged. Alone with the dead. I dare not go out, for I can hear the low howl of the wolf through the broken window. The air seems full of specks, floating and circling in the draught from the window, and the lights burn blue and dim. What am I to do? God shield me from harm this night. I shall hide this paper in my breast, where they shall find it when they come to lay me out. My dear mother is gone. It is time that I go too. Goodbye, dear Arthur. If I should not survive this night, God keep you, dear, and God help me.
Chapter 12. Dr. Seward's Diary. 18th September. I drove at once to Hillingham and arrived early. Keeping my cab at the gate, I went up the avenue alone. I knocked gently and rang as quietly as possible, for I feared to disturb Lucy or her mother, and hoped to only bring a servant to the door. After a while, finding no response, I knocked and rang again. Still no answer. I cursed the laziness of the servants, that they should lie abed at such an hour, for it was now 10 o'clock, and so rang and knocked again, but more impatiently, but still without response. Hitherto I had blamed only the servants, but now a terrible fear began to assail me. Was this desolation but another link in the chain of doom which seemed drawn tight about us? Was it indeed a house of death to which I had come too late? I knew that minutes, even seconds of delay, might mean hours of danger to Lucy, though she had again
one of those frightful relapses, and I went around the house to try to find, by any chance, an entry anywhere. I could find no means of ingress. Every window and door was fastened and locked, and returned baffled to the porch. As I did so, I heard the rapid pit-pat of a swiftly driven horse's feet. He stopped at the gate, and a few seconds later, I met Van Helsing running up the avenue. When he saw me, he gasped out,
"And it was you! And just arrived. How is she? Are we too late? Did you not get my telegram?"
I answered as quickly and coherently as I could that I had only got his telegram early in the morning, and had not lost a minute in coming here, and that I could not make any one in the house hear me. He paused, and raised his hat as he said solemnly,
"Then I fear we are too late. God's will be done."
With his usual recuperative energy, he went on,
"Come, if there be no way to get in, we must make one. Time is all in all to us now."
He went round to the back of the house, where there was a kitchen window. The professor took a small surgical saw from his case and, handing it to me, pointed to the iron bars which guarded the window. I attacked them at once and had very soon cut through 3 of them. There was a long, thin knife. We pushed back the fastening of the sashes and opened the window. I helped the professor in and followed him. There was no one in the kitchen or the servants' rooms, which were close at hand. We tried all the rooms as we went along, and, in the dining room, dimly lit by rays of light through the shutters, found 4 servant women lying on the floor. There was no need to think them dead, for their stertorous breathing and the acrid smell of laudanum in the room left no doubt as to their condition. Von Helsing and I looked at each other, and as we moved away, he said,
"We can attend to them later."
Then we ascended to Lucy's room. For an instant or two we paused at the door to listen, but there was no sound that we could hear. With white faces and trembling hands, we opened the door gently and entered the room. How shall I describe what we saw? On the bed lay 2 women, Lucy and her mother. The latter lay farthest in, and she was covered with a white sheet, the edge of which had been blown back by the draught through which the broken window, showing the drawn, white face with a look of terror upon it. By her side lay Lucy, with face white and still more drawn. The flowers which had been round her neck we found upon her mother's bosom, and her throat was bare, showing the 2 little wounds which we had noticed before, but looking horribly white and mangled. Without a word, the professor bent over the bed, his head almost touching poor Lucy's breast. Then he gave a quick turn of his head, as of one who listens, and, leaping to his feet, he cried out to me, "It is not yet too late! Quick, quick, bring the brandy!" I flew downstairs and returned with it, taking care to smell and taste it, lest it, too, were drugged like the decanter of sherry which I found on the table. The maids were still breathing, but more restlessly, and I fancied the narcotic was wearing off. I did not stay to make sure, but returned to Van Helsing. He rubbed the brandy, as on another occasion, on her lips and gums and on her wrists, and the palms of her hands. He said to me, "I can do this, all that can be at present. You go wake the maids, flick them in the face with a wet towel, and flick them hard. Make them get heat, and fire, and a warm bath. This poor soul is nearly as cold as that beside her. She will need to be heated before we can do anything more." I went at once, and found little difficulty in waking 3 of the women. The 4th was only a young girl, and the drug had evidently affected her more strongly. So I lifted her on the sofa and let her sleep. The others were dazed at first, but as remembrance came back to them, they cried and sobbed in a hysterical manner. I was stern with them, however, and would not let them talk. I told them that one life was bad enough to lose, and that if they delayed, they would sacrifice Miss Lucy. So, sobbing and crying, they went about their way, half-clad as they were, and prepared fire and water. Fortunately, the kitchen and boiler fires were still alive, and there was no lack of hot water.
We got a bath and carried Lucy out, as she was, and placed her in it. Whilst we were busy chafing her limbs, there was a knock at the hall door. One of the maids ran off, hurried on some more clothes, and opened it. Then she returned and whispered to us that there was a gentleman who had come with a message from Mr. Holmwood. I bade her simply tell him that he must wait, for we could see no one now. She went away with the message, and, engrossed with our work, I clean forgot all about him. I never saw in all my experience the professor work in such deadly earnest. I knew, as he knew, that it was a stand-up fight with death, and in a pause told him so. He answered me in a way that I did not understand, but with the sternest look on his face could ever wear. If that were all, I would stop here where we are now, and let her fade away into peace, for I see no light in her life over the horizon. He went on with his work, if possible, renewed and more frenzied vigor. Presently, we both began to be conscious that the heat was beginning to be of some effect. Lucy's heart began to beat a trifle more audibly to the stethoscope, and her lungs had a perceptible movement. Van Helsing's face almost beamed, and as we lifted her from the bath and rolled her in a hot sheet to dry her, he said to me, "The first gain is ours. Check to the king." We took Lucy into another room, which had by now been prepared, and laid her in bed and forced a few drops of brandy down her throat. I noticed that Van Helsing tied a soft silk handkerchief around her throat. She was still unconscious, and was quite as bad as, if not worse, than we had ever seen her. Van Helsing called one of the women and told her to stay with her, and not to take her eyes off her till we returned, and then beckoned me out of the room. "We must consult as to what is to be done," he said as we descended the stairs. In the hall, he opened the dining-room door, and we passed in, he closing the door carefully behind him. The shutters had been opened, but the blinds were already down, with that obedience to the etiquette of death, which the British woman of the lower classes always rigidly observes. The room was, therefore, dimly dark. It was, however, light enough for our purpose. Van Helsing's sternness was somewhat relieved by a look of perplexity. He was evidently torturing his mind about something. So I waited for an instant, and he spoke. "What are we to do now? Where are we to turn for help? We must have another transfusion of blood, and that soon, or that poor girl's life won't be worth an hour's purchase. You are exhausted already. I am exhausted too. I fear to trust those women, even if they would have courage to submit. What are we to do for someone who will open his veins for her?" "What's the matter with me, anyhow?" "What's the matter with me, anyhow?" The voice came from the sofa across the room, and its tones brought relief and joy to my heart, for they were those of Quincy Morris. Van Helsing started angrily at the first sound, but his face softened, and a glad look came into his eyes as I cried out, "Quincy Morris!" and rushed towards him with outstretched hands. "What brought you here?" I cried as our hands met. "I guess art is the cause." He handed me a telegram. "I've not heard from Seward for 3 days, and am terribly anxious. Cannot leave. Father's still in same condition. Send me word how Lucy is. Do not delay. Holmwood." I think I came in just the nick of time. You know you only have to tell me what to do. Van Helsing strode forward and took his hand, looking him straight in the eye as he said, "A brave man's blood is the best thing on this earth when a woman is in trouble. You're a man, and no mistake. Well, the devil may work against us for all he's worth, but God sends us men when we want them." Once again, we went through that ghastly operation. I have not the heart to go through with the details. Lucy had got a terrible shock, and it told on her more than before. For though plenty of blood went into her veins, her body did not respond to the treatment, as well as on the other occasions. Her struggle back into life was something frightful to see and hear. However, the action of both heart and lungs improved, and Van Helsing made a subcutaneous injection of morphia, as before, and with good effect. Her faint became a profound slumber.
The professor watched whilst I went downstairs with Quincy Morris, and sent one of the maids to pay off one of the cabmen who were waiting. I left Quincy lying down after having a glass of wine, and told the cook to get ready a good breakfast. Then a thought struck me, and I went back to the room where Lucy now was. When I came softly in, I found Van Helsing with a sheet or two of notepaper in his hand. He had evidently read it, and was thinking it over as he sat with his head to his brow. There was a look of grim satisfaction in his face, as of one who had had his doubts solved. He handed me the paper, saying only, "It dropped from Lucy's breast when we carried her to the bath." When I read it, I stood looking at the professor, and, after a pause, asked him, "In God's name, what does it all mean? Was she, or is she, mad? Or what sort of horrible danger is it?" I was so bewildered that I did not know what to say more. Van Helsing put his hand out and took the paper, saying, "Do not trouble about it now. Forget it for the present. You shall know and understand it all in good time. But it will be later. And now, what is it that you came to me to say?" This brought me back to the fact, and I was all myself again. I came to speak about the certificate of death. If we do not act properly and wisely, there may be an inquest, and that paper would have to be produced. I am in hopes that we need not have no inquest, or if we had it would surely kill poor Lucy, if nothing else did. I know, and you know, and the other doctor who attended her knows, that Mrs. Westenra had disease of the heart, and we can certify that she died of it. Let us fill up the certificate at once, and I shall take it myself to the registrar, and go on to the undertaker. "Good. Oh, my good friend John. Well thought of. Truly, Miss Lucy, if she be sad in the foes that beset her, is at least happy in the friends that love her. 1, 2, 3, all open their veins for her, besides one old man. Ah, yes, I know, my friend John. I am not blind. I love you all the more for it. Now go." In the hall I met Quincy Morris, with a telegram for Arthur telling him that Mrs. Westenra was dead, that Lucy had also been ill, but was now going to be better, and that Van Helsing and I were with her. I told him where I was going, and he hurried me out, but as I was going said, "When you come back, Jack, may I have 2 words with you all to ourselves?" I nodded in reply and went out. I found no difficulty about the registration, and arranged with the local undertaker to come up in the evening, to measure out the coffin and to make arrangements. When I got back, Quincy was waiting for me. I told him I would see him as soon as I knew about Lucy, and went up to her room. She was still sleeping, and the professor seemingly had not moved from his seat at her side. From his putting his finger to his own lips, I gathered that he was expecting her to wake before long, and was afraid of forestalling nature. So I went down to Quincy, and took him into the breakfast room, where the blinds were not drawn, and which was a little more cheerful, or rather less cheerless, than the other rooms. When we were alone, he said to me, "Jack Seward, I don't want to shove myself in anywhere, where I've no right to be, but this is no ordinary case. You know I love that girl, and want to marry her. But, although that's all past and gone, I can't help feeling anxious about her all the same. What is it that's wrong with her? Dutchman, and a fine old fellow he is, I can see that, said that time you 2 came into the room, that you must have another transfusion of blood, that both you and he were exhausted. Now I know that now I know well that you medical men speak in camera, and that a man must not expect to know what they consult about in private. But this is no common matter, and whatever it is, I have done my part. Is that not so?" "That's so," I said, and he went on. "I take it that both you and Van Helsing had done already what I did today. Is that not so?" "That's so." "And I guess Art was in on it too. When I saw him 4 days ago down at his old place, he looked queer. I have not seen anything pulled down so quick since I was on the Pampas, and had a mare that I was fond of go to grass all in a night. One of those big bats that they call vampires that got to her at night. And what with his gorge and the vein left open, there wasn't enough blood in her to let her stand up.
and I had to put a bullet through her as she lay. Jack, you may tell me about without betraying confidence. Arthur was the first. Is that not so? As he spoke, the poor fellow looked terribly anxious. He was in a torture of suspense regarding the woman he loved, and his utter ignorance of the terrible mystery which seemed to surround her intensified his pain. His very heart was bleeding, and it took all the manhood of him, and there was a royal lot of it too, to keep him from breaking down. I paused before answering, for I felt that I must not betray anything which the professor wished to keep secret. But already he knew so much, and guessed so much, that there could be no reason for not answering. So I answered in the same phrase. That's so. And how long has this been going on? About 10 days. 10 days? Then I guess, Jack Stewart, that poor pretty creature that we all love has had to put into her veins within that time the blood of 4 strong men. Man alive, her whole body wouldn't hold it. Then, coming close to me, he spoke in a fierce half-whisper. What took it out? I shook my head. That, I said, is the crux. Van Helsing is simply frantic about it, and I am at my wit's end. I can't even hazard a guess. There's been a series of little circumstances which have thrown out all our calculations as to Lucy being properly watched. But these shall not occur again. Here we stay until all be well, or ill. Quincy held out his hand. Count me in, he said. You and the Dutchman will tell me what to do, and I will do it. When she woke late in the afternoon, Lucy's first movement was to feel in her breast, and, to my surprise, produced the paper which Van Helsing had given me to read. The careful professor had replaced it where it had come from, and, lest on waking should she be alarmed, her eye then lit on Van Helsing and on me too, and gladdened. Then she looked round the room, and seeing where she was, shuddered. She gave a loud cry, and put her poor thin hands before her pale face. We both understood what that meant, that she realized too the full her mother's death. So we tried what we could do to comfort her. Doubtless sympathy eased her somewhat, but she was very low in thought and spirit, and wept silently and weakly for a long time. We told her that either or both of us would remain with her all the time, and that seemed to comfort her. Towards dusk she fell into a doze. Here, a very odd thing occurred. Whilst still asleep, she took the paper from her breast and tore it in two. Van Helsing stepped over and took the pieces from her. All the same, however, she went on with the action of tearing, as though the material was still in her hands. Finally, she lifted her hands and opened them, as though scattering the fragments. Van Helsing seemed surprised, and his brows gathered, as if in thought, but he said nothing. 19th September. All last night she slept fitfully, being always afraid to sleep, and something weaker when she woke from it. The professor and I took in turns to watch, and we never left her for a moment unattended. Quincy Morris said nothing about his intention, but I knew that all night long he patrolled round and round the house. When the day came, its searching light showed the ravages in poor Lucy's strength. She was hardly able to turn her head, and the little nourishment which she could take in seemed to do her no good. At times she slept, and both Van Helsing and I noticed the difference in her, between sleeping and waking. Whilst asleep she looked stronger, although more haggard, and her breathing was softer. Her open mouth showed the pale gums drawn back from the teeth, which thus looked positively larger and longer and sharper than usual. When she woke, the softness of her eyes evidently changed the expression, for she looked her own self, although a dying one. In the afternoon she asked after Arthur, and we telegraphed him. Quincy went off to meet him at the station. When he arrived it was nearly 6 o'clock,
and the sun was setting full and warm, and the red light streamed in through the window and gave more colour to the pale cheeks. When he saw her, Arthur was simply choking with emotion, and none of us could speak. In the hours that had passed, in the fits of sleep, or the comatose condition that passed for it, had grown more frequent, so that the pauses when conversation was possible were shortened. Arthur's presence, however, seemed to act as a stimulant. She rallied a little, and spoke to him more brightly than she had done since we arrived. He too pulled himself together, and spoke as cheerily as he could, so the best was made of everything. It was now nearly 1 o'clock, and he and Van Helsing was sitting with her. I am to relieve them in a quarter of an hour, and I am entering this on Lucy's photograph. Until 6 o'clock, they are to try to rest. I fear that tomorrow will end our watching, for the shock has been too great. The poor child cannot rally. God help us all. Letter, Mina Harker to Lucy Westenra. Unopened by her.
17th September. My dearest Lucy, it seems an age since I heard from you, or indeed since I wrote. You will pardon me, I know, for all my faults when you have read all my budget of news. Well, I got my husband back all right. When we arrived at Exeter, there was a carriage waiting for us, and in it, though he had an attack of gout, Mr. Hawkins. He took us to his house, where there were rooms for us all, nice and comfortable, and we dined together. After dinner, Mr. Hawkins said, "My dears, I want you to drink to your health and prosperity, and may every blessing attend you both. I know you both from children, and have, with love and pride, seen you grow up. Now, I want you to make your home here with me. I have left to me neither chick nor child. All are gone, and in my will I have left you everything." I cried, Lucy dear, as Jonathan and the old man clasped hands. Our evening was a very, very happy one. So, here we are, installed in this beautiful old house, and from both my bedroom and the drawing-room I can see the great elms of the cathedral close, with their great black stems standing out against the old yellow stone of the cathedral, and I can hear the rooks overhead cawing and chattering and gossiping over the day, after the manner of rooks and humans. I am busy, I need not tell you, arranging things in housekeeping. Jonathan and Mr. Harkins are busy all day, for now that Jonathan is a partner, Mr. Hawkins wants to tell him all about the clients. How is your dear mother getting on? I wish I could run up to the town for a day or two to see you, dear, but I dare not go yet, with so much on my shoulders, and Jonathan wants looking after still. He is beginning to put some flesh on his bones again, but was terribly weakened by the long illness. Even now he sometimes starts out of his sleep in a sudden way, and awakes all trembling, until I can coax him back to his usual placidity. However, thank God, those occasions grow less frequent as the days go on, and they will in time pass away altogether, I trust. And now I have told you all my news. Let me ask yours. When are you to be married, and where, and who is to perform the ceremony, and what are you to wear, and is it to be public or private wedding? Tell me all about it, dear. Tell me about everything, for there is nothing which interests you which will not be dear to me. Jonathan asked me to send his respectful duty, but I do not think that is good enough from the junior partner of the important firm Hawkins and Harker, and so, as you love me, and he loves me, and I love you with all the moods and tenses of the verb, I send you simply his love instead. Goodbye, my dearest Lucy, and all blessings to you. Yours, Mina Harker.
Report from Patrick Hennessy, M.D., M.R.C.S.L.K.Q.C.P.I., etc., etc., to John Stewart, M.D.
20th of September. My dear sir, in accordance with your wishes, I enclose a report of the conditions of everything left in my charge. With regard to patient Renfield, there is more to say. He has had another outbreak, which might have had a dreadful ending, but which, as it fortunately happened, was unattended with any unhappy results. This afternoon, a carrier's cart with 2 men made a call at the empty house whose grounds abut on ours, the house to which you will remember the patient twice ran away. The men stopped at our gate to ask the porter their way, as they were strangers. I was myself looking out of the study window, having a smoke after dinner, and saw one of them come up to the house. As he passed the window to Renfield's room, the patient began to rate him from within, and called him all the foul names he could lay his tongue to. The man, who seemed a decent enough fellow, contented himself by telling him to shut up for a foul-mouthed beggar, whereon our man accused him of robbing him, wanted to murder him, and said that he would hinder him if he were to swing for it. I opened the window and signed to the man not to notice, so he contented himself after looking the place over, and making up his mind as to what kind of a place he had got to by saying, "Lar bless you, sir, I wouldn't mind what was said to me in a bloomin' madhouse. I pity ye, and the governor, for having to live in the house of a wild beast like that." Then he asked his ways civilly enough. I told him where the gate of the empty house was. He went away, followed by threats and curses and revilings from our man. I went down to see if I could make out any cause for his anger, since he is usually such a well-behaved man, and except his violent fits, nothing of the kind had ever occurred. I found him, to my astonishment, quite composed and most genial in his manner. I tried to get him to talk of the incident, but he blandly asked me questions as to what I meant, and led me to believe that he was completely oblivious of the affair. It was, I am sorry to say, however, only another instance of his cunning, for within half an hour I heard of him again. This time he had broken out through the window of his room, and was running down the avenue. I called to the attendants to follow me, and I ran after him, for I feared he was intent on some mischief. My fear was justified when I saw the same cart which had passed before coming down the road, having on it some great wooden boxes. The men were wiping their foreheads, and were flushed in the face, as if with violent exercise. Before I could get up to him, the patient rushed at him, and pulling one of them off the cart, began to knock his head against the ground. If I had not seized him just at the moment, I believed he would have killed the man then and there. The other fellow jumped down and struck him over the head with the butt end of his heavy whip. It was a terrible blow, but he did not seem to mind it, but seized him also, and struggled with the 3 of us, pulling us to and fro as if we were kittens. But as we began to master him, and the attendants were putting a strait waistcoat on him, he began to shout,
"I'll frustrate them. They shan't rob me. They shan't murder me by inches. I'll fight for my lord and master."
And all sorts of similar incoherent ravings. It was with very considerable difficulty that they got him back into the house and put him in the padded room. One of the attendants, Hardy, had a finger broken. However, I set it all right, and he is going on well. The 2 carriers were at first loud in their threats of actions for damages, and promised to rain all the penalties of the law upon us. Their threats were, however, mingled with some sort of indirect apology for the defeat of the 2 of them by a feeble madman. They said that if it had not been for the way their strength had been spent on carrying and raising the heavy boxes to the cart, they would have made short work of him. They gave us another reason for their defeat, the extraordinary state of drouth with which they had been reduced by the dusty nature of their occupation, and the reprehensible distance from the scene of their labours of any place of public entertainment. I, quite certain of their drift, and after a long, stiff glass of grog, or rather more of the same, and with each of a sovereign in the hand, they made light of the attack, and swore that they would encounter a worse madman any day if the pledge of meeting so bloomin' a good bloke as your correspondent. I took their names and addresses, in case they might be needed. They are as follows: Jack Smollett of Drudding's Rents, King George's Road, Great Walworth and Thomas Snelling, Peter Farley's Row, Guide Court, Burn the Green. They are both in the employment of Harris and Sons Moving and Shipment. Orange Master's Yard, Soho. I shall report to you any matter of interest occurring here, and shall wire you at once if there is anything of importance. Believe me, dear sir, yours faithfully, Patrick Hennessy. Letter. Mina Harker to Lucy Westenra. Unopened by her.
18th of September. My dearest Lucy, such a sad blow has befallen us. Mr. Hawkins has died very suddenly. Some may not think it so sad for us, but we had both come to so love him that it really does seem as though we had lost a father. I never knew either father or mother, so the dear old man's death is a real blow to me. Jonathan is greatly distressed. It is not only that he feels sorrow, deep sorrow, for the dear good man has befriended him all his life, and now at the end has treated him like his own son, and left him a fortune, to which other people of a modest bringing up is wealth beyond the dream of avarice. But Jonathan feels it on another account. He says the amount of responsibility which it puts upon him makes him nervous. He begins to doubt himself. I try to cheer him up, and my belief in him helps him to have a belief in himself. But it is here that the grave shock that he experienced tells upon him the most. Oh, it is too hard that a sweet, simple, noble, strong nature such as his, a nature which enabled him by our dear, good friend's aid to rise from clerk to master in a few years, should be so injured that the very essence of its strength is gone. Forgive me, dear, if I worry you with my troubles in the midst of your own happiness. But, Lucy dear, I must tell someone, for the strain of keeping up a brave and cheerful appearance to Jonathan tries me, and I have no one here that I can confide in. I dread coming up to London, as we must do the day after tomorrow, for poor Mr. Hawkins left in his will that he was to be buried in the grave with his father. As there are no relations at all, Jonathan will have to be chief mourner. I shall try to run over to see you, dearest, if only for a few minutes. Forgive me for troubling you. With all blessings, your loving, Mina Harker.
Dr. Seward's Diary, 20th of September. Only resolution and habit can let me make an entry tonight. I am too miserable, too low-spirited, too sick of the world and all in it, including life itself, and I would not care if I heard this moment the flapping of the wings of the angel of death. Oh, and he has been flapping those grim wings to some purpose of late. Lucy's mother, and Arthur's father, and now... Let me get on with my work. I duty relieved Van Helsing in his watch over Lucy. We wanted Arthur to get to rest also, but he refused at first. It was only when I told him that we should want him to help us during the day, and that we must not all break down for want of rest, lest Lucy should suffer, that he agreed to go. Van Helsing was very kind to him. "Come, my child," he said. "Come with me. You are sick and weak, and have had so much sorrow and much, much mental pain, and as well as that tax on your strength that we know of. You must not be alone, for to be alone is to be full of fears and alarms. Come to the drawing room, where there is a big fire, and there are 2 sofas.
You shall lie on one, and I on the other, and our sympathy will be comfort to each other, even though we do not speak, even if we sleep." Arthur went off with him, casting back a long look at Lucy's face, which lay in her pillow, almost whiter than the lawn. She lay quite still, and I looked round the room to see that all was as it should be. I could see that the professor had carried out in his room, as in the other, his purpose of using the garlic. The whole of the window sashes reeked with it, and round Lucy's neck, over the silk handkerchief which Van Helsing made her keep on, was a rough chaplet of the same odorous flowers. Lucy was breathing somewhat stertorously, and her face was at its worst, for the open mouth showed the pale gums. The teeth, in the dim, uncertain light, seemed longer and sharper than they had been in the morning. In particular, by some trick of the light, the canine looked longer and sharper than the rest. I sat down by her, and presently she moved uneasily. At the same moment, there came a sort of dull flapping, or buffeting at the window. I went over to it softly, and peeped out by the corner of the blind. There was a full moonlight, and I could see that the noise was made by a great bat, which wheeled round, doubtless attracted by the light, although so dim, and every now and again struck the window with its wings. When I came back to my seat, I found that Lucy had moved slightly, and had torn away the garlic flowers from her throat. I replaced them as well as I could, and sat, watching her. Presently she woke, and I gave her food, as Van Helsing had prescribed. She took but a little, and that languidly. There did not seem to be with her now the unconscious struggle of her life and strength that had hitherto so marked her illness. It struck me as curious that the moment she became conscious, she pressed the garlic flowers close to her. It was certainly odd that whenever she got into that lethargic state, with the stertorous breathing, she put the flowers from her, but that when she waked, she clutched them close. There was no possibility of making any mistake about this, for in the long hours that followed she had many spells of sleeping and waking, and repeated both actions many times. At 6 o'clock Van Helsing came to relieve me. Arthur had fallen into a doze, and he mercifully let him sleep on. When he saw Lucy's face, I could hear the hissing indraw of his breath, and he said to me in a sharp whisper, "Draw up the blind. I want light." Then he bent down, and, with his face almost touching Lucy's, examined her carefully. He removed the flowers, and lifted the silk handkerchief from her throat. As he did so, he started back, and I could hear his ejaculation, "Mein Gott!" as it was smothered in his throat. I bent over and looked too, and as I noticed, some queer chill came over me. The wounds on her throat had absolutely disappeared. For fully 5 minutes, Van Helsing stood looking at her, with his face at its sternest. Then he turned to me and said calmly, "She is dying. It will not be long now. It will be much difference, mark me, whether she dies conscious or in her sleep. Wake that poor boy, and let him come and see the last. He trusts us, and we have promised him." I went to the dining room and waked him. He was dazed for a moment, but when he saw the sunlight streaming in through the edges of the shutters, he thought he was late, and expressed his fear. I assured him that Lucy was still asleep, but told him as gently as I could that both Van Helsing and I feared that the end was near. He covered his face with his hands and slid down to his knees by the sofa. There he remained, perhaps a minute, with his head buried, praying, whilst his shoulders shook with grief. I took him by the hand and raised him up. "Come," I said, "my dear old fellow, summon all your fortitude. It will be best and easiest for her." When we came into Lucy's room, I could see that Van Helsing had, with his usual forethought, been putting matters straight and making everything look as pleasing as possible. He had even brushed Lucy's hair, so that it lay on the pillow in his usual sunny ripples. When he came into the room, she opened her eyes and, seeing him, whispered softly,
Arthur, my love, I'm so glad you have come.
He was stooping to kiss her when Van Helsing motioned him back.
No,
he whispered.
Not yet. Hold her hand. It will comfort her more.
So, Arthur took her hand and knelt beside her, and she looked her best, with all the soft lines matching the angelic beauty of her eyes. Then, gradually, her eyes closed and she sank to sleep. For a little bit her breast heaved softly, and her breath came and went like a tired child's. And then, insensibly, there came the strange change which I had noticed in the night. Her breathing grew stertorous, her mouth opened, and the pale gums drawn back made the teeth look longer and sharper than ever. In a sort of sleep-waking, vague, unconscious way she opened her eyes, which were now dull and hard at once, and said in a soft, voluptuous voice, such as I had never heard from her lips,
Arthur, oh my love, I'm so glad you have come. Kiss me.
Arthur bent eagerly over to kiss her, but at that instant Van Helsing, who, like me, had been startled by her voice, swooped upon him, and, catching him by the neck with both hands, dragged him back with a fury of strength which I had never thought he could have possessed, and actually hurled him across the room.
Not for your life, he said. Not for your living soul and hers.
And he stood between them like a lion at bay. Arthur was so taken aback that he did not for a moment know what to do or say, and before any impulse of violence could seize him, he realized the place and the occasion, and stood silent, waiting. I kept my eyes fixed on Lucy, as did Van Helsing, and we saw a spasm, as of rage, flit like a shadow over her face. The sharp teeth champed together, then her eyes closed and she breathed heavily. Very shortly after, she opened her eyes in all their softness, and putting her poor, pale, thin hand, took Van Helsing's great brown one. Drawing it to her, she kissed it.
My true friend,
she said in a faint voice, but with untellable pathos.
My true friend, and his. Oh, guard him and give me peace.
I swear it, he said solemnly, and, kneeling beside her, and holding up his hand as one who registers an oath. Then he turned to Arthur and said to him, Come, my child, take her hand in yours, and kiss her on the forehead, and only once. Their eyes met instead of their lips, and so they parted. Lucy's eyes closed, and Van Helsing, who had been watching closely, took Arthur's arm and drew him away. And then Lucy's breathing became stertorous again, and all at once it ceased.
It is over,
said Van Helsing.
She is dead.
I took Arthur by the arm and led him away to the drawing room, where he sat down and covered his face with his hands, sobbing in a way that nearly broke me down to see. I went back to the room and found Van Helsing looking at poor Lucy, and his face was sterner than ever. Some change had come over her body. Death had given back part of her beauty, for her brow and cheeks had recovered some of their flowing lines. Even the lips had lost their deadly pallor. It was as if the blood, no longer needed for the working of the heart, had gone to make the harshness of death, as little rude as it might be. He thought her dying whilst she slept, and sleeping when she died. I stood beside Van Helsing, and said, well, poor girl, it is peace for her at last. It is the end.
He turned to me and said with grave solemnity,
Not so, alas, not so. It is only the beginning.
When I asked him what he meant, he only shook his head and answered,
We can do nothing as yet. Wait and see.